Hello, I'm Mr. Polk and welcome to my kitchen. What I want to show you today is how to base ice the cake. We've gone through how to make the icing, we've gone through how to make borders, how to make roses. We know everything now to put on the cake, but we got to make a cake to put it on. Okay? We also saw the video on how to actually bake the cake. As you can see here, here's a chocolate cake that I baked from the recipe. And what you're going to notice is this is when it comes out of the pan. This was the bottom of the cake is now going to be the top of the cake because it has what I like to call the factory edge. And when I flip it over, I'm going to peel off the paper and I'm going to evaluate it. If it looks nice and flat like this one, I'm going to go with it. If it was all like lumpy bumpy, I would cut it with a knife. One of the things that I think separates a professional cake and just an at-home cake is a lot of people will bake their cake in a pan and it doesn't bake flat. Okay, it rises more in the middle than it does in the edges. And they just let it like that. And then when it comes time to decorate, they kind of decorate it like a dome. I mean, if you're making a soccer cake, that's different, soccer ball, but we want something flat. Now to base ice it, I'm going to teach you two ways. The first way is the way that I normally do it. And that is I use this side icer. And you probably don't have one of these at home. I mean, you could pick one up, but it's a wide tip made to put the icing right on the cake. And I like it. If you didn't have one of these, you could just fill a Ziploc bag, cut a hole in the end, and zip it around, and that would work too. That's what I would recommend. If you have one of these, it's great. If not, I would do a big old Ziploc bag and just squeeze it on. And what I like about this is if you notice as I go around, I'm putting the grooved end in, and you have to sort of squeeze and push a little bit because you don't want it to roll off. But this is metering the icing, okay? This is putting the icing on the thickness that I want, all right? And then you go across the top. I like to overlap because the edge is the hardest thing to make because that's all icing. And then I squeezed out a lot of it already, so I'm just going to put a little bit more in. Okay. And then you just squeeze a little bit on the top, just like that. And then fill it in. And then what you're going to do is you're going to use one of these bench scrapers, and you could use the metal spatula, but with the bench scraper, what I'm going to do is I like to just give it a little dip in hot water, and I like to start with the edges, and you just sort of go around to make it smooth, all right? Hold it nice and square. Now I'm doing a smaller cake, so it's a little easier. You just hold it nice and square, and then any extra you have, you put in the bowl. And then what I like to do is go over my top, and at first I just sort of go around. Just sort of seal everything up. Sometimes I scrape in like that a little bit. And what happens is, as I scrape around and try to keep the scraper flat, you want to do it sort of quick. The more you work it, the softer the icing gets. You're going to notice that what I've done is I've got the icing going up and it goes over. The next step is to take the side icer and go this way. So now the icing that was out is now getting pushed up because we're making that edge. Okay, I like to joke and call it the square edge, even though it's a circle. But the edge is tough because it's all icing. Okay, icing comes up, icing comes over. All right, so it is a little tricky. So our cake, looks pretty good. We're just going to go around again to get it nice and smooth. And then what I do is I take my side icer, I clean it off a little bit, and now we once iced it this way. Pushed it flat, brought it up, and now we do what's called scrape the ends in. And you just take the edge of your bowl scraper and you just pull the ends in. And this is really what gives you a nice look. Okay? And if you have a low spot, you can just go over it and cover it up. Okay? You usually don't get any crumbs. If you do get a little bit of crumb or something of the cake, you can just take that out. And then the last thing I do is I go around the edges one more time to get them smooth. And then I just go over the top. Okay. And then if I have to, one last time on the outside and call it a day. You don't want to keep going over and over it because what's going to happen is you have to do one last little bit. You're just going to keep making the icing soft and it's not going to stay. You don't want to have too much water. And this looks good. And you have a nice, even cake. The next way to do it is by hand. And I prefer to use the side icer. I think you have a less chance of crumbs. Okay, and I think if you don't have a side icer, you can find something. I mean, I've already taken like a plastic to-go container or styrofoam and cut the lid off and made one of these. I mean, you can get very creative. If you're going to try and do it by hand, okay, without a side icer, people have a hard time with this because it ends up getting, pulling it all out. So one of the first things you can try is a crumb coat, and that is just take a little bit of icing and don't care what it's going to look like. And this is to practice. I'm just getting it on the cake, and it seals all of the crumbs, okay? And I hate to keep putting my knife back in the bowl to get crumbs in there, but what you're also going to notice is that with a spatula, it has a leading edge and a trailing edge. The edge you're leading with, you keep it higher so that it actually moves around the cake. So I would actually crumb coat the top of this, and then I would take some icing and crumb coat the bottom. Now no one's going to see this, all right? And you see how I just laid the icing on there and brought it around? And now that it's crumb coated, you're going to want to pop this in the fridge for a little bit so it gets hard. Or you could even put it in the freezer for a few minutes so it gets hard. So if I could get the one out of the freezer, I can show you what to do next. You don't have to do a crumb coat, okay? However, the idea of the crumb coat is it keeps the crumbs in. That's why it's called a crumb coat. It just keeps it underneath. Okay, so this one was in the freezer for a couple minutes, and you can see that it's now hard. Okay, it hardens up. All right, the buttercream gets nice, so that now you can work it. Okay, and it just makes it easier for a beginner. And what I like to do, if you're going to try it this way, get yourself a good bit of icing. And remember, it's about spreading the icing out. Okay, so I'm taking my icing and I'm trying to, I don't know if you can see with the spatula, you see how I'm trying to work the icing out? So I'm not really picking up on the cake, right? That's what I think a lot of people do, is they try to spread the icing, like drag it, and that's when it really starts to pick up the cake. Now one thing I am trying to do here is I am trying to get over the edge of the cake. All right, and that's going to allow, it's going to help for the edges so the crumbs don't lift up. But you see how I'm not pulling icing from the cake? I'm adding icing to the cake. Okay. And then the next step is the sides. And you have to get it on your spatula. And you just, it's tricky because I'm trying to lean over here to show you. But you're just sort of working it on the cake. But notice how I'm pressing it down and I'm not dragging it. Okay? If you're doing a cake by hand like this without a side icer, when you try to drag the icing, that's when it's going to pick up off the cake. The other thing you have to watch doing it this way is that you're getting the right amount. What can happen is if you get too much icing on one side of the cake versus the other, versus having a round cake, your cake looks more like an egg. Okay? So we're almost there. You can see that I've got just a little bit to go. Okay. But again, it's all about laying the icing on and then moving the amount of icing. Try not to drag it. All right. Then you can do two things. You could either switch, okay, to some kind of a side icer, a homemade side icer, whatever you have, or you could keep using the spatula. Notice I am using an offset spatula. What you're going to do is the same thing. I like to clean it off, give it a little dip of the water, and go with the edges. And again, just sort of work your way around. Honestly, I do it just like it was a side icer. But here's the thing. Notice that whole leading edge, trailing edge is how I'm holding it. Okay? Alright, if I have to go backwards, I switch it. Okay? And that's the whole idea. When I do the top, you'll see that, is I'm going to do the same method. I'm going to bring this in, okay, so that I have some icing to work with. And then I'm going to bring it around. And now I have a good amount of icing on there. So I can do just like I did with the side icing, okay, with the bowl scraper. But notice how I'm holding it. And that's really the key if you're going to do it without using one of these, is You hold one edge higher than the other, and then you just sort of bring it around. Now, if you notice you're off, you can sort of fix it. I'm going to give that once around again, just kind of like that. Okay, that looks great. And then I'm going to go around the edges. Okay, the edges look nice and smooth. So it's the same process using a spatula. It's just a little trickier. I find that when I do it, if I'm doing big wedding cakes and stuff, I prefer the side icer and the bowl scraper because it kind of becomes an extension of your hand. But I want you to see that you can use whatever you have. Alright, so if you just have a spatula at home, I want you to see that you can get just as nice of a cake with that as you did with the other stuff. So I'll finish this up. Go around one more time. And again, I hope you, by seeing it twice, two different ways, you understand the concept. And if you didn't have an offset spatula, you could use a straight one. Straight bowl knife is fine. And I'm just going to give this one last go around and call it a day. So there you can see you can do that with the spatula, or you can do it with the side icer combination. This was done with all spatula and a crumb coat. This one was done with the side icer like you would see them at the bakeries, and use the bowl scraper. So either way, you can get yourself a nice base ice cake, which is your blank canvas to decorate. So thanks for decorating with me today, and I hope to decorate with you real soon right here at Mr. Polk's Kitchen.